So we're starting Sarah, and Sarah means the name Sarah means mother of nations. We start in Genesis chapter 11. We just ended in Genesis chapter 3. So another woman is not mentioned in Genesis until chapter 11, and that was after the genealogy after the Tower of Babel.
Right.
So
Interesting.
um, the first thing that's said about Sarah is she was barren. That's the very first thing that's mentioned about Sarah in the scriptures, is that she was barren and had no children. And this was approximately 700 years after Babel, and it speaks of how Abraham and Lot took their wives and came out of the Chaldeans, which that was Babel. I guess I'm gonna need. Okay, here's my Bible.
Right.
So that was in Canaan. So he went from Babel to the land of Canaan, and that was a land of it was actually the promised land. So that's the land in the future, that's the land of milk and honey. But the people that were there prior to the Israelites were very wicked people. They would perform child sacrifice, body mutilation in order to appease their gods that they were serving. So that was the land that Abraham, and at the time he was called Abram and she was called Sarai. And Sarai means princess. So this land, Canaan, again, it was the promised land, and it was referred to as the land of milk and honey. And in Joshua, it talks about how the men, when they went in and when they came out, the grapes that they carried required multiple people to carry this bunch of grapes.
Right.
So it was a very blessed land, but it was, at the time, it was a very wicked land. And God said to Abraham that he would give their descendants the land. And by their descendants, he meant Abraham and Sarah, which were then Abram and Sarai. Abraham was a descendant of Noah. Again, in Genesis 11, it goes through all of the genealogy for Abraham to show that he was a descendant of, I believe, Shem. And after Abraham went to this new land, he built an altar to remember God and to have a place of remembrance. And that was something that he carried over from his old way of being, because that was something that was done in Canaan. In Babel, was these altars were erected to remember the different deities that they worshiped throughout the different seasons of the year and what have you. So there was a time of famine, and prior to the time of famine, Abraham, his nephew Lot, and their two wives went to Egypt to escape the famine. So they knew the times and seasons, as they were instructed to do and to learn from their forefathers who had a relationship with God, because God put the times and the seasons there for us to recognize what was going on. So Abraham, Sarah, Lot, and his wife, whose name has not been mentioned yet, I'm not sure if it's mentioned later, they all went to Egypt. And Abraham was afraid that Sarah was going to be not only taken by Pharaoh, but then he was going to be killed in order so that Pharaoh could then have Sarah as his wife, Sarai. I should call her Sarai. She's still Sarai now. And I didn't know this prior to a few years ago. I always thought Abraham was a liar. I was thinking, well, what's he lying for? Telling, he's supposed to be a great man of God, and here he is lying to the Pharaoh, saying that Sarai was his sister, when in actuality she is his half sister. So it wasn't technically a lie, but the fact
You
is,
call it a hack.
he
Hack.
yeah, he said it out of fear. So that's
Fear.
that's
Definitely.
where and that reminds me of Lot, where Lot said, the very thing that I have feared has come upon me. And we create structures around ourselves when we hang on to the energy of fear, and it can actually draw those same or similar events into our reality. So that's what happened here with Abraham. The very thing he feared, Pharaoh took her. Um, but, and then he also gave Abraham sheep, oxen, donkeys, camels, and servants in exchange for this woman, which it's just very bizarre that he wouldn't have mentioned, well, she's my wife, actually, again, out of the fear of the Pharaoh killing him then. So, and subsequently, after the Pharaoh took Sarai into his house, God struck the Pharaoh's house with plagues. And some say that it was plagues of like the boils and things, similar to what happens later, where they would get the boils on their genital region. That was just something that came up in the research. So Pharaoh knew that the plagues were caused because he had taken Sarai, Abram's wife, and he knew. It doesn't say how he knew, but in those times, especially in these regions, they had different magicians and different people that would be able to interpret what was going on. So someone must have told him that it was Abram's wife, and that was why the plagues happened. And Pharaoh returned Sarai to Abram, um, and I believe may have even given him some more items. So he wasn't even, and he didn't ask for the things back that he had already given him. I guess that's more the point. And he wasn't even really, it doesn't even say he was angry with Abram. He was just, it was just a thing where he just gave her back to him, and then the plagues were alleviated from the Egyptians, which it's an interesting thing that all that occurred. So Lot and Abram at this time, again, when the people of when God's people follow God's plan historically throughout the scriptures, they were blessed with physical blessings. So Abram and Lot both had a large amount of livestock and servants and what have you, and the land that they were occupying was too small for both of them to have their wives and um, their livestock and their servants. So Abraham, because of his character, allowed Lot to choose first which land that he would like to go to. So Lot chose, he went towards Sodom, which the Bible says was a land of flowing waters and green pastures, and so that's where he went. And it was, so now we're in Genesis 13 verse 16. Is this, and this I found really interesting. I don't remember ever seeing this before, that God tells Abram that I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, which is interesting because last time we heard the dust of the earth, was when God was telling the serpent that he would eat the dust of the earth. So the first thing that God says about Abram's descendants he will make them as the dust of the earth. And he was referring to how numerous they were going to be. So after that, Sodom and Gomorrah were raided, and Abram went to go save Lot. And when he was there, he did reap some of the spoils, and it mentions Melchizedek, which we're not really going to get into because this is a Bible study of the women. Maybe in the future I'll do a Melchizedek Bible study. But the king of Sodom recognized who Abram was and wanted to give him money, and he refused the money because he didn't want the king to say that he was the one that made Abram rich. Abram wanted to make sure that all of the glory for his riches went to God the Most High. In chapter 15, God told Abraham he was with him. Oh, so God was speaking with Abram. Sorry, I'm going to go back and forth between Abram and Abraham just because it's a difficult thing. So God spoke to the man, just like in the Garden of Eden when he spoke to Adam. So that will change, but the first time he spoke to this couple was he spoke to Abram, and he tells him, your reward will be great. And Abram's response was, well, what will you give me, Lord, since I have no heir? And at the time, his servant was going to get everything he owned. When someone in that time didn't have an heir, it would be the firstborn male under his roof would inherit whatever he had. And this is when God told him to look outside at the stars, and that is the number of your descendants. And he believed in the Lord, and the Lord counted it to him as righteousness. And now we're on 16. So now chapter 16 says, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So this is the third woman we'll touch on, is Hagar.
Can I say something real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Interject something?
Yes, please.
Genesis 12:16, when Abraham did that, whatever you want to say, deception or whatever he did,
Mm-hmm.
half-truth. So it says that he treated out Abraham well for her sake, for Sarah's sake. So the Egyptian guy was doing everything, blessing Abraham because of Sarah, basically, because of how he treated her, because he did kind of send her off to get adulterized.
Right.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
When it says that the Egyptian guy gave him oxen, he-goats, men servants, and maid servants. So you got to understand where Hagar came from. It does say she came from Egypt, but she actually came from this agreement that he was trying to fix.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of like a demonic entrapment already that was set up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, who caused it? No, so who caused it again? Because he wasn't taking serious the words that God said, get up and get out of here and go into the promised land. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't understand yet, is what I'm saying.
Right,
because
right.
the story is about Abraham meeting the Lord God Almighty, right?
But, right.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right?
Wow, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I didn't come across that. So Hagar, and I guess I didn't spend enough time really sitting with how Sarai must have felt.
She's an Egyptian maid. Much, right?
Yeah.
She didn't come from Abraham's lot. She came from that encounter.
That encounter. So yeah, I should rewind there, just taking a moment, because we want to. I'm so used to doing Bible studies, just going through all the interesting facts, but with this, I really did want to, as we did with Eve, to kind of sit as women and think about what that would be like to trust your husband to go into this unknown
Yeah.
land, and then
But she
to
did obey him, right?
she did
She
obey
obeyed him.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she did.
And to know that in all, for most
Better words,
likely,
he was gonna rape her or
right,
whatever.
most likely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
So
God watched over her. Which
God
is
did
awesome.
watch over her. Yes, he did. And so her faith as well, so just the way that, as we learned in Genesis, that the man and the woman become one flesh. So just as
Mhm.
Abraham's faith was accounted to him as righteousness, I would venture to
Right.
say so was hers.
Oh yeah,
That
that's
she
what Paul
was,
talks about. Yep.
yeah,
She's part
faithful.
of the new covenant. She represents the new covenant. Yeah.
Yeah,
Amen.
yeah.
Forgiveness and restoration. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm that's a whole new thing that with this transaction, that
Mm-hmm.
this is the reason that she chose Hagar.
Yeah.
And
And isn't it interesting how she despised her right away? So that wasn't just she despised her because she had a son. It was because she despised her
right,
because of what she reminded her of.
right, she reminded her of essentially her husband's betrayal.
Exactly.
So
So sad.
yeah, but still she remained faithful to him,
Yeah.
and ultimately wanted to fulfill the covenant. And it is, like you're saying, it is interesting that of all of the women servants that he had, and I'm sure he had more prior
Oh, I'm
to
sure
this
concubines or
Egyptian
whatever. Yeah.
encounter, that Hagar was the one that she chose. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if they had formed some kind of a bond, or
Or she had unforgiveness that backfired on her.
yeah, possibly, as it often does. Unforgiveness often backfires. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
okay, so Sarai had still bore him no children. And I wonder what her emotions were when she said, "Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children."
Right.
And another interesting thing as well with people not being able to have children in this time, it was always the woman's fault. Like
Right.
it was never the possibility. Now we know in our time that it could be one or the other,
Right.
but in that time it was always, the burden was always on the woman to produce an heir.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a heavy thing. So Hagar, the name means flight, which is interesting because that'll come up in the future. So Sarai said to Abram, "Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So again, as history has a propensity to repeat itself, as Adam listened to his wife, Abram listens to Sarai instead of listening to the voice of God.
Mm-hmm.
And in this time, it was not unusual for a servant girl to bear the child for a man when his wife was unable to. And the practice that I found in my research was, during that consummation, the servant would rest her head on the lap of the wife, which that's an interesting thing to think about, and then again to sit with the emotions that Hagar must have been experiencing, because I would venture to say she was probably not a willing participant in this, or maybe she was. Again, maybe her and Sarai had formed some kind of a friendship. The scriptures don't really go too much into their relationship prior to this. But yeah, so just that whole thing about Abram listening to Sarai instead of listening to the voice of the Lord, which happened again. So I think, okay, we'll go a little bit further. So verse 3, Abram lived 10 years in the land of Canaan. Abraham's wife took Hagar the Egyptian as her maid and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. So I'm not sure if he was her maid for 10 years, if she was her maid for 10 years, and they did form a relationship. So she conceived a child, and when Sarai saw that she had conceived, that's when she despised her. So that's when she started becoming jealous, and this is
Actually, it's Hagar that despises her.
Oh, it's Hagar that despises Sarai.
Yeah, because at 4 and 5 clarifies it. Yeah, she hated her.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. So that I
Yeah,
would say that they probably did have maybe some kind of a relationship, and then
Yeah, what maybe wasn't good.
yeah, and yeah. So, yeah, okay, and then Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done me upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when you saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight." Right? May the Lord judge between you and me. So I would think that Abram was showing love towards Sarai, compassion towards her, and maybe neglecting his relationship with Sarai, and then of course that then Hagar would exalt herself, thinking that now she's the head woman of the household because she's about to bear this child.
Right.
So then Abram says to Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your power.
And then she hates her.
Right, do to her what is good in your sight." So Abram is like, "What do you want me to do? You're the one that told me to do this thing, and now you're mad about it." And as a woman, I probably have been guilty of doing that, possibly more than once. Saying a thing, and then when it actually happens, being upset about it. So Hagar, so Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. So she started being very nasty to her, and she fled again. And the name Hagar means flight. So it's interesting to pull those things apart, and just look at how the names kind of create what happens. And I am going to stop there because I didn't do any more of the research. So I'm going to stop there for questions and comments, and we'll